Hello, everyone. Hopefully we are now going live to you. Project Sleep's Facebook page. I know it takes people a few minutes to find us. I am here in Los Angeles. I'm Julie Flygare, the president and CEO of Project Sleep. And we have actually two very special guests with us right now up in Palo Alto, Dr. Mignot and Watson. Mm-hmm. Say hello.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you guys for joining us. I know it takes people a few minutes to find the video. So as people are catching up and getting logged in and finding us here, I just wanted to mention a few kind of like housekeeping things about the video. Please remember that we are going to be recording this and it will be publicly available. So if you want to share it afterwards and rewatch it, then that will be available. And also that because we are, recording it, remember that, you wouldn't want to say anything in the comments that you wouldn't want to share publicly because the comments will stay with the video. But that being said, we'd love for you to please share the video and comment where you're watching from. It's really fun to see where people are tuning in from across the country or perhaps around the world. I know we had some international friends that were interested in joining us today. So if they're awake, I hope that you guys will comment in to say where you're watching from. And as things are resonating with you, please do, type in some comments. It's really fun to see afterwards. And please remember that we're also doing this for educational purposes. So we're excited to share, Dr. Mignot really will be sharing some important updates from the narcolepsy research field, but we can't provide individual medical advice. So if anything in our discussion today sparks any questions about your own medical situation, please reach out to your sleep specialist or your medical health professional. We will take a few questions at the end, hopefully. So, listen to our discussion, and if any questions are coming up that we haven't answered, please type those over to us and we should be able to answer a few questions at the end. So let's see, with that, I was just going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Mignot. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with him, and he really is the man that needs no introduction. He is our narcolepsy wizard, and to many people around the world, a big hero. But let's see, I just need to pause for 1 second because I am not sure if we are actually broadcasting right now, if people are able to see us. It does say we are live. Sorry, 1 second.
It says live on Facebook on my.
Yeah, it does on mine too. So I just need to go ahead and double check that people are able to see us. That is strange. I'm just hopefully getting word from. Okay, all right, people can see us. Phew. All right, thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Tracy. So we are live, okay. So I will just share a little bit about Dr. Mignot's background before we get it started with the discussion. Dr. Emmanuel Mignot is the Craig Reynolds Professor of Sleep Medicine at Stanford. He received his MD and his PhD from Paris 5 and 6 University in France. He practiced medicine and psychiatry in France for several years before serving as a visiting scholar at the Stanford Sleep Disorders Clinic and Research Center. He joined the faculty and became the director of the Center for Narcolepsy in 1993. And he was named Professor of Psychiatry in 2001 and later served as the director of the Stanford Center for Sleep Sciences and Medicine. He has received many more awards than I could ever, go over. And he's authored and co-authored over 200 research papers. And his current research is mostly focused on the neurobiology, genetics, and immunology of narcolepsy. a disorder caused by hypocretin orexin cell loss, with indirect interests in neuroimmunology of other brain disorders. So we were just so excited to have Dr. Mignot take some time to give us an update. Last we did a broadcast together. We were actually together up in Stanford in September of 2018. So it's been almost 2 years now. So we're really excited to, hear what has been the updates since 2018, because there's actually been a lot of great progress. So before we get started with some more of the science though, how are you doing, Dr. Mignot, with this shelter in place?
Thank you, Julie. I'm doing quite well, actually. It hasn't slowed down. I mean, I'm working as hard as ever. It looks, I'm a little zoomed out because, I go from Zoom to Zoom, but a lot of what I do is to talk to students and do some data analysis, and actually it can be done from remotely. So it hasn't slowed down the research too much.
Oh, that is really good to hear.
Yes.
And I heard you maybe have been doing some new exercise?
Oh, of course, yes. No, I mean, yeah, you have to make sure that when you're confined like this, I like to go out, but unfortunately I'm doing yoga online, but I do my best to stay in shape. Yes, that's very important.
Yoga, that's
especially
cool.
from narcoleptic patients.
Yeah, I do. I'm doing a lot of Zumba right now, so it's also via Zoom. But
I prefer hip hop, but
hip hop. So I don't know if you guys know, Dr. Mignot and I were both in Australia 5 years ago for a wonderful conference hosted by Narcolepsy Australia, and it was, I just checked, it was the first week of May in 2015. And this is where I learned that Dr. Mignot is quite the dancer.
I don't know. I do my best, but it's true I enjoy it. But
yes, the Australians hosted a big dance, a big fancy dinner party and dance the Saturday night of the conference. And Dr. Mignot was right out there with everyone else dancing away. So fun fact.
I mean, in France, I think we dance a little bit more, so that comes a little bit from my education. I mean, I guess. And we often invite each other for these parties where people dance. I don't think it's as common here.
Yeah, it's not. It should be.
Yes, I agree.
And how is Watson doing there?
Watson is doing well, but I think I need to brush his teeth. I've noticed, but no, he's doing quite well. He's very happy because we are here all the time, and so I think it's even better for him. Huh? So yeah, he's really nice. I mean, as you probably know, in this shelter in place, it's fantastic to have a dog because that's the only excuse for going out, and we all crave going out a little bit. So he walks a lot, and since he has four very small legs, he has to walk quite a bit every day, but that's good.
And I don't know if everyone knows that Dr. Mignot's dog Watson does have narcolepsy with cataplexy. So yes. How's his cataplexy?
I mean, it's still the same. I mean, I think it's hardest when we walk actually for a long time. Then at the end, sometimes he's just exhausted, sleepy, and he just can't move anymore. But the good news about a Chihuahua is that it's really easy to carry, and he's very easygoing, so it's not a big problem.
Good.
So we can carry him if he's tired, which was not the case for the other dog before. It was really exhausting when they had too much cataplexy or were too tired.
Yeah, carrying me with cataplexy.
Yeah, I've learned to appreciate that. Very Chihuahua, I would never have, I don't think I would ever have considered a Chihuahua. My dogs before were like a Dachshund, and of course you probably knew Bear, the Skipper Key, and they're much more high maintenance. This dog is like a cat. You don't have to do anything. It's just, you can carry him around, it's just easygoing. Of course he falls asleep a little too much, but that's okay. At least they don't have to do any social duties, Mm-hmm. So he probably would fall asleep during this interview because
Yeah.
he has heard it before.
Yeah, that's true. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started and talk about, since September of 2018, there's been a lot of advancements in our understanding, thanks to you and to some other research groups, in understanding type 1 narcolepsy with cataplexy, and more about the genetics and some of the environmental factors. So can you give us an update?
Yes, I think now it's more and more clear that the cause of narcolepsy type 1 is really this autoimmune process where the immune system gets triggered by the flu and starts to attack certain pieces of the flu that resemble hypocretin orexin, which is a chemical in the brain that helps to stay awake. And when the immune system starts to confuse, the flu and these cells that produce hypocretin, they destroy them. And once you don't have hypocretin, this is the cause of type 1 narcolepsy. And that's relatively simple.
Well, you make it sound simple. My goodness. For the environmental factors, do you think it's just flu, or could it be other things?
We don't know. Probably flu is a big one, but strep also has been suggested, strep throat. And I still believe that's involved as well. That, if you have the flu and strep on top of it, it makes it worse. Whether or not we'll discover some other things that could cause it or trigger the immune response, it's always possible because nature is very diverse. So there must be a lot of different bugs or viruses that may have sequence that could look a little bit like hypocretin. So of course you're going to ask me if coronavirus is going to trigger narcolepsy. Is that right?
Well, at some point, yes, I was going to ask something like that.
Yes, actually someone from the CDC asked me that question, and it's difficult to be sure, but probably not, because I think we would have noticed it before, but it's not possible to really be sure that it could not have a sequence inside that would resemble the hypocretin. Because one of the things we've discovered actually very recently is that it's quite difficult to figure out based on the sequence, just looking at the sequence of the flu peptides and the hypocretin, what really resembles hypocretin. We don't have a good model. It's more in three-dimensional space that it needs to resemble, and it's not very easy to make a model to see what really resembles hypocretin. So it's always possible that there will be something in the coronavirus that resembles hypocretin, but probably not.
Can you explain that little piece a little bit over again for me? So the flu has a piece of it that mimics, or no, not mimic, it looks like a hypocretin cell?
Yes. So exactly. What happened is there's a little piece of the flu that looks a little bit like hypocretin in its sequence and its structure, so that when the immune systems, the immune cells that are recognizing the virus, they take the virus, they kind of chew it up in small little pieces, and then they recognize specific pieces. And one of these pieces looks like hypocretin. So it starts to attack the virus, recognizing this piece with special receptor. And then at one point, we don't exactly know why, there is some hypocretin floating around close by, and it starts to recognize the hypocretin. And then it gets more and more directed towards hypocretin. And then it starts to think that the hypocretin is just a flu. As a consequence, it attacks the cells that produce hypocretin, like if they were flu-infected cells. And then at the end, they are all dead and you have narcolepsy.
And why is it certain people that happens to?
So there are probably many different explanations. One of them is genetic, because the way our genetic system reacts to flu infections, so to infection in general, is very personalized. And it's very useful because otherwise, if a new flu was coming about, or like the coronavirus, for example, we don't know why some people are very sick and others are totally fine. In fact, we know, of course, that if you're old and you have a lot of comorbidity, you have a lot more chance of having a very severe coronavirus. But there are even kids that sometimes die from the coronavirus, or young adults. And almost surely they're genetic, because everyone has a slightly different genetic makeup that makes them able to direct immune reaction against different pieces of the coronavirus. And that makes us better able to fight the coronavirus if it mutates in different areas, because this way we're not all attacking the same piece of the coronavirus. And that's a little bit the same for the flu and narcolepsy. There is some people that attack more a certain piece of the flu, and others that attack other pieces of flu, and that depends on certain of their gene, in particular ones that's called HLA, which some of you that are nerds like me, know about it. There is a gene called HLA that predisposed to narcolepsy. And this HLA gene has like many, many different variants. And there's only one particular variant that predisposed to narcolepsy. That's called DQB10602, that 25% of the population has. And you need to have this particular variant because this particular variant sees a piece of the peptide of the flu that looks like hypocretin. If you don't have this particular piece of HLA subtype, which about 25% of the population has, you are going to bind other pieces of the virus that don't look like hypocretin. So that's why at least the genetic play a big role. And I'm sure for coronavirus, we're going to discover the same thing, that the people who are very sick probably have certain HLA subtype, for example. And maybe we'll also discover that maybe some people who after coronavirus will have strange complication, autoimmune disease. That's very possible, depending of their genetic makeup. So definitely some is genes. There are also genes that are very important with how we react to the flu. We have even found certain genes that patients with narcolepsy have more than controls that process a little bit differently the flu, or makes the immune cell more reactive to the flu. And all this makes you more susceptible to narcolepsy. And in addition to the genetic, we know that there's just bad luck that happen, because many people get the flu and many people have the genetic makeup, and only a very small percent get narcolepsy. And the bad luck is at least partially due to probably the type of infection you have had in the past, because your immune system learns every year. Every time you get a new flu, it just learns this new flu, and it kind of adapts itself over the years. So the state of your immune system depends on what you have experienced as infection since you have been born. And that's why actually even twins that have exactly the same genetic, if you really look at their immune system after 15 years, it's quite different. So there's definitely your past history of infections that also makes you more or less susceptible to narcolepsy. So that's why actually we even have hopes that one day we might even be able to maybe vaccinate people to prevent them from developing narcolepsy, because we might be able to make their immune system go in a certain direction against the flu that will avoid them to develop this immune reaction that is confusing the flu with hypocretin.
When is that coming?
That's a good question. So I think we could try now. The problem is, narcolepsy is not that common, and people are always a bit afraid of tinkering with nature a little bit, So is that worth it to do it? Considering that there are so few people who develop narcolepsy, it's very difficult. You never know. By pushing the reaction towards not narcolepsy, maybe you could create another problem. You can never be absolutely sure. I don't think so. And I think eventually when we'll know more, it will be done. But let's say that right now, I think we need to do a little more research before doing this. I think where it could be very helpful is, for example, Julie, in your brothers or sisters, or, people who are family members, because they have more chance of developing narcolepsy. We know that. It's not a huge risk. It's only about 1% if it's a brother or sister or a child. So it's not like something to be worried about, but 1% is not negligible. So for these people, I think it could be worth it to develop a special vaccine or something that you could give them when they're young and will avoid maybe them to ever develop narcolepsy. But
people that have the DB, I'll get it wrong, but the genetic marker, that's still a quarter of all people, right? That have that.
So I think, even in patients who have, so the chance of developing narcolepsy in the general population is about 1 for 2,000 to 3,000 people. If you are DQB1 or 602 positive, it's about 1 for 800 people, okay? Still low, okay? But if you add all the genes, we're actually now doing that. If you add all the genetic predisposition, you could tell actually exactly what chance everyone has to develop narcolepsy. But still at the end, I think we still would come up with, even if I take your genetic makeup, I would probably say, Julie has 1 for 200 chance of developing narcolepsy. I would never be able to say from the genetic, Julie, that's it. You're going to develop narcolepsy. But when you go to 1 for 200 or 1 for 100, like family members or people who have a high genetic loading, it might be worth it to consider a vaccine slightly different and would prevent the development of narcolepsy. But I think it will take a long time before this is, done, unfortunately. I wish that things will move faster, but I think you have heard all the discussion about how complicated it is to introduce a new vaccine. And of course, all of you know that there were one particular vaccine that even triggered narcolepsy. So it's always a risk-benefit ratio to try something new.
So there still needs to be stuff to figure out about the genetics and about the immunology, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then
because you're right. If we somehow are able to really understand this process completely, we might even be able to see which one are highly at risk. Because, for example, there may be some people who already have the cells that are ready to be activated by the virus and could be then, killing hypocretin neurons. Maybe these people is only 1% out of 10 of narcoleptics. And then it might be really worth it to prevent it. So if we could discover the exact cells in the blood that are dangerous, we might be able to find a way to avoid them to be ever activated. So, this is the fun and also the frustration of research. It's a little bit like you're trying to narrow down until you really get the final answer. And I think we still have to learn about the immunology to be able to really predict who is going to develop narcolepsy. But it might be possible that one day we'll be able to take a blood sample and say, this person is really at very high risk because they already have the cells that are dangerous. And those maybe we could use a vaccine to prevent it.
I just think it's so fascinating. Dr. Mignot and I had a phone call a few weeks ago that sparked my idea to do this broadcast because Dr. Mignot actually recommended a book to me about 5 years ago, I think when we were in Australia, called The Great Influenza. And so I'd read that 5 years ago, not realizing, of course, how it would be so
relevant.
Yeah. But I remembered the specific chapter and I went back and looked at it again, how after the 1918 flu, it took a while too. It wasn't always immediate, but there was Parkinson's like symptoms. And there was even an interesting form of schizophrenia that some people, developed. And so, this idea, I think our society hasn't quite caught up to understanding how flus and influenzas and that immune system's interaction with the brain and neuroscience. Sorry, I'm the layperson, but I just think
I think you're absolutely right. I want to say one thing about that is what is the most complicated organ in the body is the brain, right? I mean, we know it's super complicated. Actually, the immune system is as complicated because every minute, if you ever take a petri dish, and of course, you spit on it, I don't advise you to do it, but a lot of things will grow pretty disgusting, staphylococcus and it's beautiful. But even if you take like the surface of your skin, we have 5 more you have heard that your microbiome, we have 5 more bacteria that we have human cells. So it's an enormous amount of bacteria and viruses that are always in constant synergy with you. And of course, it's I'm sorry to say, but I still believe in natural selection. It's kind of natural selection in action every second. So the day you are dead, these things I mean, I'm sorry, but you just start to rot from the inside because the bacteria just are not enough kept, by the immune system. So we are constantly fighting even our own bacteria that are friends of us. We still tell them, just don't go too much, So the immune system is more kind of a general equilibrium. And sometimes we get this completely new, new flu or new bacteria, but it's incredibly complex. It's really our whole interaction with the outside. And I think it's estimated that there is about 10% of all the genes in the body that have a role in the immune system. It's absolutely huge. So we are discovering that more and more diseases are going to be related to infections and in ways that we did not understand. And for a long time, people have believed that the brain was immunoprivileged. This is the story of mankind as well. I mean, if you read a lot of history book, we thought that we were in the center of the universe, of course, where, so the earth is in the center, and then we discovered we run around the sun and we are like a little nothing. Then after, we probably thought that Europe was the only center of the universe because, and of course that's not true. And then after we believed that we were, different from all animals, and we realized that we're the same as all animals. And then we discovered that we have a very different conscience and we're different from animals. But now we are realizing that animals have very complex behaviors, and I'm sure that animals have, some animals can. There were one paper recently just came out that suggested that certain monkeys already have all the instruments for language. So it's clear that the more you realize, the more we see that we are not different from animals. And I lost my train of thought, but I think the whole point was that we are really in harmony with the rest of the universe. We're just a little piece.
Well, you were saying that that we thought that the brain was
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's the same way, of course, the brain is considered the gold organ. My God, the brain, that's us, But actually, I think we're really underestimating a lot what the peripheral body can do. And I wouldn't be surprised, for example, when we measure proteins or even gene expression in different parts of the body, like the liver, you can actually find many, like about 10% to 30% of the gene or protein in the liver, they change with sleep. So it's like if the liver was sleeping himself. So I think we definitely overestimate probably a little bit our brain. And the second thing is we have always kind of looked at it like it's immune privilege, that the immune system didn't go there because it was all in the protected, because it was so important, because we're so unique. And now we realize that it's not very different from other organs, that cells of the immune system go into the brain and they make sure that the brain is not infected like the rest of the organs. So right. The same way they can be subjected to autoimmune disease like narcolepsy. But it's a relatively new concept. I mean, this was really not believed to be true even 10 years ago. So now there is a lot more interest in understanding how the immune system works in the brain, and many people is believed in many, many more diseases than just narcolepsy.
Right.
And schizophrenia and Parkinson, exactly. Yeah.
And I've seen with COVID-19 that there have been some neurological, they're starting to even report already on some neurological symptoms. And
stroke.
Can you answer for me can you tell us a little bit more about what happened in 2009 and 2010? So you alluded to a vaccine causing narcolepsy, but can you go over just briefly like what happened with the H1N1 flu?
Yes. So I think that's good because maybe I can teach a few of the listeners about the differences between the coronavirus and the flu. So genetic material comes in two flavors, DNA and RNA generally, and DNA is what we have in our cells, and RNA, a lot of viruses have RNA and instead of their DNA. RNA is something we produce in our body to produce protein, but it's not our genetic materials that we use to transmit to make babies. We use really DNA as our core genetic material. And the virus, like both the coronavirus and the flu, are RNA virus, which are actually more common than DNA virus. And one of the issues with RNA virus is that they have to be transformed into DNA to be reproduced inside the cell, because a virus is like a parasite. What it does is really inject its genetic material and try to use as much as possible of our own cellular machinery to reproduce. So it can't reproduce by itself. So in fact, a virus is at the border between being alive or not. A lot of people ask what it is. Is a virus a living organism or not? In theory, it's not a living organism because it cannot reproduce by itself. A bacteria is life because it can reproduce by itself. You give it nutriment and it reproduces by itself. But the virus, it has to have a host, and it's going to use the host machinery to reproduce itself. And when it's an RNA virus, it needs first to be transformed in DNA. And as a consequence, one problem is it mutates a lot because it makes a lot of errors when it does that. So the RNA virus are a little more dangerous because they mutate more, they change over time more, which is good and bad, because at the same time, the coronavirus, like the flu, is going to evolve probably to be more happy with humans, and it's not the advantage of a virus to kill everyone, because it rather like makes them sick and go to the next person. Because if you kill everybody, it's not good for natural selection. The natural selection is not going to function. It will immediately die and the virus will disappear. That's why Ebola, which is so bad, has never been like a huge epidemic, because it's too lethal. But right now we have a new virus that's at the same time can reproduce a lot and is also quite dangerous.
Can you describe about the H1N1 and what happened and how?
So the slight difference between the flu and the coronavirus also is, it's technical, but that the flu is in some ways more dangerous because it has what we call a segmented genome. That means that the chromosome of the flu, there are several chromosomes. Instead of being just one piece of DNA, it's several pieces of DNA. And as a consequence, sometimes it kind of get mixed up with another flu from another species, usually swine or bird, and then it reassorts its chromosome, and suddenly you have a very, very mixed virus that's half bird or half swine and half human. And then this one goes through the population, and that's a new virus that can be very dangerous. This kind of, we call this this animal flus that suddenly go into human. It happens once every 50 years. And when it happened, it can be really horrible. So you mentioned the 1918 flu. It killed about 100 million people. So that was really awful. And I think we can learn a lot from this to apply to coronavirus. Then there were another flu like that in 1957. It probably killed about 200,000 people. So that was a lot of people as well. Then there were a flu called the Hong Kong flu in 1968. And interestingly, so until 2009, the flus that were circulating was a descendant of these flus that came from animals that had adjusted to human. So that, every year you get almost the same flu that just has this new mutation, and you just need a vaccination that change a tiny bit, and you are relatively protected already because you have already seen the flu. But then when this new flu happened, and in 2009, there were another ones that came out of swine, it can be very dangerous because you may not have any immunity, and the virus is much more nasty, as I explained, because it has not adjusted to the host with all this new mutation. And that's what happened in 2009. And we had already suspected that narcolepsy had something to do with the flu or strep throat, because we had noticed that in young kids that develop narcolepsy, very often they had upper airway infections or strep throat, and then they develop narcolepsy during the summer. So in kids, the narcolepsy is very often very abrupt. In older adults, sometimes it starts over a period of a year, so it's a little hard to say when it started. But in kids, it can be very, very abrupt. Suddenly, someone developed narcolepsy, sometime within a week. You know, the child was completely fine, is 7 years old, and suddenly falls asleep all the time and gain a lot of weight. And the parents sometimes can tell you, oh, this started the week of March 15. You know, there's no doubt it was totally fine before. And when we plotted when narcolepsy started in these young children, it was always starting during the spring and the summer. So that with the strep and so forth, we already suspected that some infection during the summer were triggering narcolepsy. But then when you had this new flu that happened in 2009, the swine flu, people panicked exactly like coronavirus, except that, thank God, it was not as bad as coronavirus. But it started in May in Mexico, you know, and initially people thought it was going to be as bad as the coronavirus because people, you know, what we call the case fatality rate, the number of people that come sick in the hospital and that need really and die was about 0.6%. For coronavirus, it's about 1.2%, so it's higher, but it was still very high. But that was overestimated, clearly, because there were probably a lot of people that had it that never had symptoms. But still, people really thought, my God, this new flu is going to be like 1918. And that's why they pushed this particular vaccine very, very quickly. And unlike coronavirus, it's a little bit better because the flu, we already create a flu vaccine every year with these old strains that circulate. So creating a flu virus with a new strain, it's not that hard. It's a little bit like plugging in the same process with a different flu. So they really hurried the vaccine at very fast. You know, from May, they could get it in December because they were very afraid of the following winter. But then there's one particular company that made a particular flu that we don't really understand, flu vaccine in Europe called Pandemrix, and you've heard of it. That was, I believe, probably a bit too strong and very special. And I think we actually found we have an idea of maybe why it was particularly bad. I think one of the ways the protein of the virus were extracted maybe created more of a problem. And it kind of seems to have triggered a lot of cases in Europe. But the virus itself also increased the number of cases. So clearly it was just a virus that sometimes was confused with hypocretin. But with a vaccine that maybe was a bit stronger and the composition a bit different, this effect was even magnified. So a lot of people developed narcolepsy after this particular vaccine only in Europe. So of course, now we are a little bit in the same situation. So now, since 2009, every year you are getting vaccinated, I hope, because I'm totally pro-vaccine, because the flu still kills, 25 to 50,000 people every year, especially old people. And you are being vaccinated with a descendant of this H1N1 swine flu. There's just a tiny bit of changes that are accumulated in the last 20 years, since 10 years, sorry. So they grow in eggs a descendant to be as close as possible of what circulates now, but it's very similar to what it is. And it's also a descendant. Second strain that is put in is the Hong Kong flu, which is from, I told you, in 1957, that's still circulating. That's called H3N2. And then you get also another influenza B, but that's not very important. So that every year, that's what you get as a kind of a booster. And so everyone is waiting for a new pandemic that will happen sooner or later, the flu. Sometime people are terrorized, especially about the bird flu, because the bird flu has never really passed into human. But if you get a bird flu, usually you can get sick of the bird flu, but and you have 50% mortality. So it's terrible. However, you cannot pass it to another human. For that, you would need to probably be infected at the same time with a human flu for this kind of recombination to occur. And this has never happened, but people are very worried. And in fact, certain agencies like BARDA have spent a lot of money to try to make sure that if this ever happened, we'll be ready to create a vaccine against a new flu like that. Of course, nobody expected the coronavirus.
Right.
Everyone expected the flu.
So,
and I can tell you more about the coronavirus if you want to.
Well, so we won't know when another flu, I mean, I understand better from what you've just said that the swine flu from 2009 was this new, thing.
Yes.
We won't know,
And
I
now
guess, whether corona or any of the bird flu, if any of those are going to cause an upsurge in narcolepsy until we're able to do that 3D modeling
yes,
you mentioned earlier.
You're right. But in general, it has more chance to be a flu because a flu looks like a flu. And we know that the flu is resembling, certain pieces of the flu are resembling, hypocretin. The probabilities that a piece of coronavirus would resemble like hypocretin is much lower.
What about the strep throat? Does strep throat look like the hypocretin?
The problem is the difference between the flu and strep is a bit the difference between a lizard and a human. A bacteria is 1 million times more complex than a virus.
Oh.
So to give you an example, the virus, like the flu, has only, I think, 13 different proteins, because it just has a minimum needed to reproduce itself and to use the machinery of the cells. Coronavirus is actually more complicated. It's a single genome. It's a 30 kb, only one chromosome. So it doesn't have that problem of jumping species the same way. It can jump species, but as a block, and then recombine with other species. Like this one comes from a bat. It's almost, very similar to a bat, and it has a little piece that some crazy people say was fabricated in the lab. But when you look at the sequence, it's actually very similar to the sequence in pangolin. So most reasonable people, I think, would agree that probably it's a bat that infected the pangolin, that reinfected the bat, that infected the human, something like that. I went like in a completely different direction. I'm sorry. I hope it's interesting to you guys.
Yeah, I'm sure. We have so many different things. So let's just maybe.
But it's possible that the coronavirus will produce narcolepsy, but unlikely. But what I think is always possible is that there will be a piece of the coronavirus that will look like something else in the body, and that it will maybe create another autoimmune disease or also complications that we don't know. That's always possible. Yeah. And maybe we'll never really know.
And before, I guess while we're on this topic, I remember you mentioned that you have been working possibly, I think, was it on vaccine and vaccine side effects? Have you been helping with any of that as far as COVID-19?
Yeah, so what we do in narcolepsy is actually very applicable to coronavirus. I mean, I still focus on the flu itself because I'm a narcolepsy specialist and I want to solve your problems. But everything I'm learning about the different pieces of the virus and how they interact with the immune system to produce these reactions, I think is absolutely 100% applicable to the coronavirus, because I'm the forefront of understanding this. And, it's pretty much the same problem. In fact, it wouldn't be very difficult for me technically to do similar studies with the coronavirus, trying to understand how the coronavirus is recognized by different people. It's just that, I'm more focusing on narcolepsy, but knowledge is always transferable. So, as you said, that's why people are a little worried about creating this coronavirus very quickly, vaccine. First, it's very mysterious, the immune system. For example, the bird flu, if you try to create a vaccine, it's very difficult because you inject the bird flu and people don't develop immunity. We don't really know why. Why you have to put a strong adjuvant. And similarly with the coronavirus, you never know. Every virus is different and it may behave differently. There is even cases where a vaccine can produce a worse disease. Like I'm sure you have heard that dengue fever, there have been a vaccine against dengue fever that was developed, and some which is transmitted by mosquitoes. And some people were vaccinated, it produced, the immune system became more active. So you would think it's good, but actually it was bad because in some ways it produced an overactivation that actually killed people. So sometimes you really have to be cautious because you never really know what you're doing with a vaccine. So I think what right now is very hard because there is this need to understand the side effects of vaccines that are going to be different in every case, even within flu, between coronavirus and then at the same time, there is an urgency. I mean, everyone is very scared that the winter will come. And since usually these things are seasonal, that it will become worse. And it would be good to be ready. So it depends how much risk you want to take. And in some ways, I think it's what I'm hoping is that people will realize a little bit better. People expect things to be perfect, but unfortunately, I always say, unfortunately, we always take little risk. If you take an antibiotics, if you take anything, there's always a risk attached to it. There's no free lunch in biology. If you have something active, it always can produce a side effect. I mean, we just have to make sure. And it's so difficult, like for narcolepsy, the side effect of the swine flu vaccine produced by GSK in 2009, it was only 1 for 16,000 children. So it's not a huge number, but you cannot test a vaccine in 16,000 people to try to see if nothing happened. So it's very difficult. I think we definitely need to phase more carefully how we, and it was 6 months later too, that most of these cases developed narcolepsy. So imagine now we start with the coronavirus. If we start to vaccinate millions of people, we won't know before 6 months, and maybe there could be something even worse than narcolepsy. So I have to tell you, some people must not sleep very well when they do this kind of decision. Even myself, when I first discovered the association between the flu vaccine and narcolepsy, I didn't sleep for days because I was kind of convinced and I wanted to warn people. But in these cases, if you warn people, but you're wrong, oh my God, this is the end. I mean, can you imagine? You have very few data. There is some cases that have been reported. You think it's true, but you can be wrong because the data is not good enough. But if you say something and it's wrong, your career is destroyed. People will say, my God, you're an anti-vaccinator, anti-vaxxer, you should be killed. And if you say nothing, people could come back to you. What? You said nothing, but you already knew, blah, 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 blah. So it's extremely difficult to take this decision in time of crisis like that. Right. Sorry, I wanted to make a pitch for all the hard people that work so hard and have this decision to take,
Of course. I just feel, I think there's just a sense from the narcolepsy community and from myself personally, even though I didn't get I already had narcolepsy at that point, of not letting the knowledge that has been gained through the experience in 2009 and 2010 go to waste. So how can we make sure that whatever has been learned, or you guys are still working on, are you able to communicate with the people that are working on vaccines or be part of that process at all?
Yes, the good news is I have some good friends at the CDC or people I've worked with, and I think they trust me and they talk to me and I discuss with them and I just give my opinion and I think they consult me. So I think that's the good news. The bad news is they still don't give me any funding to do research, but that's a different issue. I think people are still, I've learned a little bit about this. They will be, I think, more cautious. But the problem is sometimes you can't be cautious. If it turned out to be so bad, you really have to weigh the benefit-risk ratio. So it is a very hard decision. But I do believe that the big problem we have is a problem of being very short-sighted. Like, for example, the coronavirus, we had SARS, we had MERS. I mean, these were 2 outbreaks of coronavirus that happened before. There were definitely some warning. And I know people who submitted grants to try to develop, learn how to develop vaccines for coronavirus that were rejected, by NIH, I don't know how many times, and it's just absurd because you wait until you have a crisis and then you put billions and billions of dollars, whereas it right now, I mean, you can study if sleep interacts with a vaccine, like if you're sleep deprived or if you go more in the sun, I'm sure you can get funding to see if the vaccine is more efficacious, because they are just pouring tons of money at the last minute on things that don't make sense, really.
Yeah,
I'm sorry
we are
to say.
we're very reactive as a society in many ways.
Exactly. And that's a really, I think for research, it's so important to go on the long haul. I think my story with narcolepsy is I've worked for 30 years on narcolepsy, and there's no shortcut. Sometimes you just get something that makes you move very quickly. Sometimes you just have to just dig a hole, and it's already hard to dig, but then if no one is helping you, it's even harder.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, we'll get to that in two ways, because I'd say that narcolepsy advocacy is similar. There's no magic cure to, advancing it. It's a lot of little steps. And we're also using our advocacy to try to make sure that more narcolepsy and sleep disorder research is getting funded. So more on that in a little bit. But I do want to ask you a little bit about narcolepsy type 2 and idiopathic hypersomnia.
Yes.
It's really been evolved, I think, over the last 5 years as far as our understanding of what those conditions are. And, what can you tell us about how we're kind of like coming to some better understandings?
So I think we are in a very, I'm going to say maybe I'm not politically correct here. I don't know, but we're a little bit at no, it's okay, at the destructive phase. Okay. What I mean is that we have had a lot of assumptions, made a lot of assumptions about what these problems are, whereas we knew absolutely nothing. Like idiopathic hypersomnia is different from narcolepsy without cataplexy. It's very clear from more and more studies that there's no real limit. It's like, I'm sorry for the noise, but it's almost like the flip of a coin. You do an MSLT, which is a test we use. Sometimes there's SORM, sometimes there's no SORM. If you don't have narcolepsy type 1, it can be just random. And it's pretty awful because some people are treated because they are called narcolepsy type 2, and others, it's much harder with the insurance, whereas they have exactly the same problems. They suffer as much. So everyone realized that there is a problem and that we need to come back and figure out a way to better study this condition and better realize where the subgroups are. That doing this MSLT to separate the subgroup is probably not the right way to do it. But the problem is, like in a lot of cases, when you come back, it's also a little hard. I mean, you just have to two-step back to better jump, as we say, and that's exactly where we are. But I think we have a lot more hope. And one of the big hope I have is thanks to new technology. I mean, I haven't discussed that much in this talk, but I have a little piece of myself that does a lot of machine learning and high, computer science as applied to narcolepsy. And for example, now we can diagnose narcolepsy based on a night sleep study without doing the MSLT, just by the brain waves during the night. We don't really need the MSLT. Even so, it's not yet in clinical practice. We feel very strongly it works as well. So in theory, you could just do only a sleep study like for sleep apnea and know if you have narcolepsy. So that's already a big progress. But we also know that just doing a sleep study is not the best way. The best way would be to give you something that you can wear for 3 days, continuously move around, do whatever you want, go to bed, like a little cap, and then we will see exactly how is your sleep and your wake in a natural environment. Then we will really know your problem. I am a big believer in how people live is really the key, is that right? And I think we need to apply this kind of new technology to narcolepsy and hypersomnia. And for narcolepsy type 1, it won't change that much because we have very good diagnostic procedure, even the MSLT works well. But I think for hypersomnia, we'll probably realize that there's very different types of waves in different people. And I'm sure that they will have different treatment. And I think we'll make a lot of progress. So my opinion for hypersomnia and narcolepsy without cataplexy is we're a little bit in a destructive phase, but at the same time, with the new technology that's coming, we have the opportunity of looking at it in a new way that I think is going to make a lot more difference in how we treat it. And also the other positive, of course, is that we have all these new treatments coming in. I mean, now there is a lot of interest in helping people who are tired and sleepy. And, of course, there is drug to replace orexin, hypocretin. There's histamine drugs. I mean, there's a lot of interest in helping people with this kind of problem, staying awake. But I think right now, it's like we take a dart and then we throw it at the patient and we just hope it's going to work. And that's pretty much what I say to my patient. If they have narcolepsy type 1, it's pre-codified. But for narcolepsy type 2 or idiopathic hypersomnia, it's trial and error. Of course, there's a little bit of intuition. I mean, every doctor will tell you, yes, I know very well what to do, but the truth is it's a little bit of intuition, but it's not worth much. It's really trying and error.
Right. I think that's true for everyone. I mean, because all of our bodies are different. So
that's true. But for narcolepsy type 1, for example, there's still like the same biology exactly, so the expectation of a response is much more clear, and right. And we see it, pretty consistently. And of course, when we will have orexin agonist or hypocretin agonist, I mean, of course, that will going to be even more clear, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I just am so glad that there's more research and interest in this area, because I, for a long time, felt like most of the research, or all of it, was in narcolepsy type 1, which of course is what I have, and so it's important. But I know a lot of people have type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So yes. It's a very, I don't know if I'd call it destructive, but there is a phase of movement right now, as far as our understanding.
Yes, destructive is true. It's not. Yeah, I don't know if destructive is the right term, but I think we are really looking at it again in a more objective way. And it is really good. I mean, I think it's going to, I suspect we will define new types of disease that will be much better the target of specific medication. We just need to do more study. And by the way, of course, I've always been interested also in idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy type 2. But the reason I have not studied that is, first, that narcolepsy type 1 seems to be much better defined. So I knew it has more chance of finding a result. I didn't have to do this when I'm trying to redefine the problem, It was already very well defined. And also now it's mostly solved. So I think definitely a lot more people, including myself, are going to work on these other conditions.
Good. I like that. You mentioned a few things about treatment, but let's go over that a little bit more. So there have been a few treatments that have been recently FDA approved over the last year. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yes, so there's one that's called pitolisant, which is working. So most of the drugs, first I should mention the drugs that we have right now that work on narcolepsy. They're pretty much of 3 classes. One of them is stimulants, like it's a little bit like amphetamine or modafinil, and they mostly work on dopamine, a chemical called dopamine. Then there are antidepressants, and they mostly work on norepinephrine and serotonin, and they work on cataplexy, so they are not used as much for idiopathic hypersomnia, even so sometimes it can be beneficial. And then there is Xyrem that helps people to sleep at night. And clearly these drugs sometimes can help idiopathic hypersomnia or narcolepsy without cataplexy. But as you see, they work on dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin for antidepressant. And for GHB, it's probably GABA. And these new drugs that are coming, one of them is called Sunosi, which is working both on norepinephrine and dopamine. So it's a little bit different than modafinil. And it seems to be, it's still in the same class of drugs, how it works, than the stimulants, but it seems to be better, more effective than modafinil, without having the big problem of amphetamines that are kind of too strong. So definitely, I think it's a drug that will help more patients than the traditional drug. Then there is a new drug that works completely differently, that works on histamine. You all have been taking antihistamine, and you all know for allergy, and you all know that it makes you sleep. So this drug does the opposite in the brains, but it doesn't make your allergy worse, but it makes you more awake, and it works completely differently. And that's pitolisant. The general feeling of the drug is that it's a drug that helps to stay awake and reduce also cataplexy if you have cataplexy. But it's certainly not like a curative compound. It can help some patients, and I suspect it will also help a lot of patients with idiopathic hypersomnia. And we just need to use it more to really understand better which patient will benefit. But the big advantage of it is it clearly is different. It doesn't work the same way as amphetamines and all this other drug. So I think we have already two completely new drugs. And then finally, of course, most exciting for me is that there is this new drugs that are coming that seems to be able to replace orexin hypocretin, which basically could replace what's missing in narcolepsy type 1. And it seems to be very spectacular in patients with narcolepsy type 1. It really kind of makes them completely awake. I mean, there's one study that was done, nothing that has been tried works so well. So there is a study where they have taken patients with narcolepsy type 1 and they use a test called the maintenance of wakefulness test, which you know. So horrible, it's a torture for narcolepsy. You ask them to stay awake for 40 minutes, 4 times a day. A patient with narcolepsy basically can't even stay for 3 minutes. I mean, in the dark room like this, you tell them, stay awake. I mean, that's just against the nature of narcoleptic patients. They fall asleep in 2 minutes. After the drugs, they could stay awake for 40 minutes, the entire time of the test. Nothing that I've seen ever has been able to do that. So that's a big hope for patients with narcolepsy type 1.
In clinic, it's just starting right now, right? The clinical trials in the US are just starting.
Yes. And the good thing is that there is another, it worked also in people with idiopathic hypersomnia or sleep apnea, for example. You know, people with sleep apnea sometimes are tired and we can't really get them back to normal. And we don't really know why, but it's clearly not due to the lack of orexin, but it still made them more awake as well. So it works also in normal people. So I think it could very well help a lot, you know, patients with idiopathic hypersomnia or narcolepsy type 2. You know, it's not because it's not the cause of the problem that it's not effective. You know, I mean, we use drugs, you know, for pain, you know, like if you have pain, you take opioids or anti-inflammatory, and sometimes they work even if you don't have an abnormality in the opioid system. I mean, there is symptomatic treatment. So I think that there's big hope that this will make a big difference. And you're right. So clinical trials are being started. Unfortunately, they were interrupted because of the COVID-19. We can't do anything. Everything was stopped. And but I think they will restart as soon as we are done. I mean, for us, since Stanford asked for a lot of paperwork, it just gave us more time to do the paperwork to start the trial.
If people want to look for clinical trials, clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to look and search for narcolepsy and get more information, because it is a great way. Unless we have people that are willing to participate in clinical trials, we can't get new treatments.
Yes, you're right.
We do.
And I like to say what's a little tough about clinical trials, of course, is that first you may be on placebo. So, you know, always you have one arm where it's placebo and one arm where it's active. And the second thing that can be very frustrating is that it may work great, but then after you can't have the drug. They will tell you, I'm sorry, we need to wait until it's approved. So sometimes it can be almost like a taste of what it's going to be, and then you can't continue. But still, I think if we don't have anyone, you know, doing this kind of studies, then it will never be available to anyone. So that's why I'm hoping that it will happen during the summer, because you know, the summer is a good time, for example, for students that are already in college, or it's easier for people to take some time off, you know, because since they have to stop their medication, it's easier for people to do it.
Yeah. So definitely, if you can, that's a good thing that you can help to advance science. And we always are looking. It's just exciting that we have clinical trials finally in the narcolepsy space. So Project Sleep will hopefully get some more information out to you about what the opportunities are. But yeah, right now, not so much. We can't be recruiting for clinical trials at this moment, but please keep it in mind. Is there anything else on treatments?
Yeah, no, I think, no, but I really do think that what I was telling you about monitoring and being able to have this new technology. Right now, the problem is everyone is measuring sleep with their watch. I'm sure you all have this gling, gling, gling. And we know that it doesn't really work very well because it measures activity. So if you don't move, it says you sleep. because it just can't measure your brain activity. But now there's some new devices that can measure brain activity and that you can wear at home, and the data could be directly sent to the, to a clinician. And I really hope that in the next few years, we'll be able to have people really wear these things for several days. And we'll really see that will be useful, not only for potentially diagnosing patients, understanding really what the nature of their sleep attacks and so forth. So when they're spaced out, what's happening in their brain, but also potentially titrate the drug to really see that it's really helping the patients on their actual symptoms. So I'm very positive. I think the development of new technology is also going to really help a lot of patients to get better treated. Because often we just are working in the dark, we just titrate. And some people, including myself, we are not always very good judges of how we feel. It's very difficult to judge really completely how you feel. That's why, of course, when I talk to patients, I often certainly in children, it's very helpful to talk to the parents, because sometimes the perception of the patient is different. Very often patient with narcolepsy underestimate their symptoms. They, I don't have cataplexy anymore, but in fact, you see them having cataplexy all the time. And so having an objective measure is really helpful. And I'm really hoping that will help to treat better patients as well. So it's not only drugs, I think devices are going to help a lot.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's great. Thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to ask you a question that was my favorite question we got back in 2018 when we did our broadcast, which was, what keeps you up at night and what energizes you to get up in the morning?
Right now? So, what keeps me up at night? I mean, for narcolepsy patients or personally?
Just like, well, I'll go first. How about that? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the narcolepsy community, I would say what keeps me up at night is, I think, worrying about whether we're doing enough on the advocacy front. And I know we are already doing a lot, and we're doing more and more, and I'm so proud of that. But I just continue to think, like, we focus a lot of our efforts at NIH as far as the NINDS. It's just one of the institutes there. And now Dr. Mignot's research is actually more, in immunology, which is actually a different department or institute at NIH. And we haven't focused our efforts on that as much. So that's what kind of keeps me up at night, is like, are we doing enough to keep up with, some of that, even though I know we're doing a lot. And then the thing that energizes me to get up in the morning is I'm super excited to be working a lot more, and actually even talking to Dr. Mignot recently about social support. And I just think that the social experience of narcolepsy has been under-recognized. A little bit like how Dr. Mignot, you said, like, we thought like the brain was the thing, and then you realize there's the body. And then I would say there's the body, and then there's also like all the people around the person with narcolepsy. And I think that the family and friends and the impact that a community and society has on our experience with narcolepsy is underrated. So I'm really excited and energized about seeing what kind of social support, enhancements we can do to help people more in the future. So there's my answer. So what's yours?
So that's a good point. Yes, I would say that definitely what keeps me at night is the funding. It's just like, we always are struggling. We have to write these grants, and they get rejected by people who don't know what they are talking about. I'm so sorry. But, for example, I told you this HLA DQB 10602, the lifetime I submit on my grant to NIH. There's hundreds and hundreds of studies that have shown that it's like 97%, that it's really all the same disease. And one of the reviewers said, but the disease narcolepsy is complicated. It's not just one mechanism for the narcolepsy type 1. And it's just, so you have people review your grant, you take 9 months of writing it, you submit it, and then you have people who don't know anything that spend 10 minutes and destroy it. And then you read it and you say they are completely incompetent and you have no way of doing anything. That's really hard. And of course, now I should say that my lab would have died pretty much if I not have had help from patients with narcolepsy, as well as I should recognize Jazz Pharmaceuticals. They have been giving me some unrestricted kind of gift, you know, and without that, I don't think my lab would be able to continue. And right now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like the jazz is going to continue, at least right now. So of course, what keeps me at night is I may have to fire people and stop the research. You know, I resubmitted a grant and we have to wait. So yes, that's a constant struggle of researchers. And what's very frustrating too is, for me, it's easier to get funding in other areas. So my solution would be to work on Alzheimer's disease. Everyone works on Alzheimer's disease and it's easy to get money and then I will do something else. But nobody cares about narcolepsy. Nobody knows anything about narcolepsy. The reviewers don't care. It seems to be so unfair. So yes, it keeps me, you know, up at night is my own lab. And of course, also you're personally invested with all these students. They work super hard like me. And it's so hard, you know, to see how they're beaten up by the system. You really have to be a saint to be a researcher. I mean, I have to say. But anyway, then what energized me the most, I mean, I have to say still the new agonist. I mean, I'm so excited for patients, you know. If it works as well as it looks like, I mean, this is going to be a real change for a lot of people. And I think we're very close to really making a dramatic change in the diagnosis and the treatment of this disease. That will be so profound that people who have narcolepsy won't have the same life that people who have had it today. And I mean, when you think about that, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it just, you know, I have a smile like this because, you know, people, all this suffering that will be gone, I think is for generation. You know, it's not just now, it's going to be forever. And that's what's really exciting about research too, is that not only you can do a lot of good for a lot of people, but also there's this discovery process, which is really amazing. You know, it's discovering something new. There's nothing more exciting. So I don't have any problem being excited, but I have to say that the funding is always kind of, I'm a little bit like the Jack O'Malley, you know, I come up from a hole and then I get another hit and then I go to the side. But I'm still very enthusiastic every morning, yeah, to work. Yeah.
I really like how the birds started chirping behind you as you started talking about what made you hopeful. So I feel like the birds are on our side.
No. I think it has never been a better time for patients with narcolepsy. The future is really bright. Absolutely. I mean, with new treatments, of course, you can never tell. There could be something bad about that treatment, and then we'll go back to square zero. Not zero, but we'll have to wait for another drug. But even if the drug from Takeda, you know, is not working, there's several other companies that are working. So it will happen, I'm pretty sure, because there's nothing fundamentally flawed about the concept. And it seems that the drug is well tolerated. So it will happen. Of course, I hope it will happen the next 2 years and not the next 5 years. But I think it's really exciting. And then the understanding of narcolepsy, I think I'm really hoping we'll have a blood biomarker and that we can really diagnose people very quickly and treat them immediately. So I hope that narcolepsy would be, I was going to say a thing of the past, but, you know, I mean, some of these things we forget, but before antibiotics, people were dying, you know, in childbirth like flies, and now that never exists. So, I mean, what I hope is one day narcolepsy will be just something that people treat and you can live a completely normal life.
Yeah, and I think that was really humbling for me to realize when I first started treatment in 2007, you know, I didn't like, you know, I was like, oh, these treatments are so challenging. And then when I started studying the history and realizing that, you know, how many people had fought to even make those treatments available for people like me to be diagnosed in 2007 and to then be like, oh, these treatments are horrible. Like other people fought so hard to make those available. And they have been, you can see already the progress, I think, in how far we've come. So that's got to be the exciting thing, is that we can see that that'll happen even more so. Let's hope.
Yes. The other thing that I think we need to make progress in, which I'm hoping, is recognition of narcolepsy. I mean, there's still people who definitely have narcolepsy that don't know they have it. It's hard because I don't know how to do it yet. You know, a lot of people have done campaigns with, I think we have to go straight to the public. So I really appreciate a little bit what you're doing, by the way, of course, Julie, because I think the new model shouldn't be to try just get doctors to recognize better narcolepsy. I mean, this is hopeless. I mean, most of the patients that come to me, very often it's not the doctor, it's themselves that figure out what it was. I mean, it's a different world out there. And
that's true.
And I think, but still, even with that, there are still people who just don't know they have narcolepsy. And I just think we need to figure out, especially in children, I think it's really a problem because children, if we don't catch their disease very quickly, it can be irreversible. You know, they may develop obesity, they can gain a lot of weight. It's so much harder to bring them back where they were, you know, when they have skid out of the road, you know, like miles away, you have to bring them back. And it's almost criminal, you know, if you don't treat a child really well from the beginning.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue. Perfect segue into what I just wanted to mention towards the end here. So I just think I will, as Dr. Mignot was mentioning about awareness, I do have a few slides I just created to share a little bit about some of what we're doing in these areas. And I just thought it'd be easier to show you a little bit. So let me see. Hopefully you'll be able to see this.
I'm going to move. Yeah.
What? Okay, you go ahead and move.
Yeah, because I was under the sun, and since I have, yeah, good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Project Sleep does a lot of advocacy, and we're ramping this up. So hopefully our efforts will be even more helpful to people like Dr. Mignot, but other researchers across the country as well. We have these 4 principles that Project Sleep is working on: advancing sleep research, accelerating treatment options, ensuring access to healthcare. Access and coverage to healthcare is a newer area that we're actually doing a lot more work in this year, which is really exciting because, especially in wake of COVID-19, because with so many people losing their jobs across this country, we need to make sure that people will be able to continue to access affordable healthcare and be able to, you know, just have the treatments they need. So we're working more on that and furthering education, awareness, and training. So I just wanted to share, you guys might be familiar with the letter F we did in mid-February and late February, and that was on the House side. And so some of the ways that those priorities, you know, those big priorities end up playing out is that we're working to encourage NIH to continue advancing the scientific understanding of sleep disorders. So that's encouraging more research funding at NIH for researchers like Dr. Mignot, but other researchers across the country. And we actually have had seen some real success over the last couple of years as we are paying attention to this and we are talking to our members of Congress about this. Congress is letting NIH know that this is important to their constituents, and we are seeing some more research funding coming through for narcolepsy, which is really exciting over the last couple of years. We are also always looking to include sleep disorders in the DoD, that's a Department of Defense research program, so that sleep disorders and, you know, is being studied at the Department of Defense. The last thing and the most important that we're working on right now is helping to ensure that the CDC creates a chronic disease education and awareness program. So this would actually be a new program at CDC. And we started working on this last year. We got a lot of traction on the House, but we didn't get it through the Senate. So now we're working to make sure we get it through the House and the Senate to create this program, which will be a mechanism that organizations can apply for to get funding to fund sleep and sleep disorder awareness programs. This is really important because right now the CDC is actually spending no money, zero, on sleep disorders awareness. So some of what Dr. Mignot was mentioning as far as like big public campaigns, educating, you know, the public, educating doctors, educating educators like teachers, all of that takes money. And right now we have not had the funding of other areas as far as some of that campaign and awareness effort goes. So I just wanted to mention, if you aren't yet familiar with Project Sleep's advocacy program, these are some of the things we're working on. And we're hopeful. We have some great advocates now working on the Senate side of these efforts and hope to have good results. But please get involved in our advocacy if you haven't already. I also just wanted to mention, as far as like when Dr. Mignot mentioned about long delays to diagnosis, we are doing this story sharing series right now, and they're weekly right now. every Sunday. And we're having our Rising Voices of Narcolepsy Advocates share their story every Sunday night. And so many of the stories talk about people going over 10 years without a diagnosis. So please join us. These stories are incredibly, they're heartwarming, these incredible people. And Lizzie will be sharing her story on Sunday. And if you have missed the prior ones, we have a whole series on our Facebook video library for you to check out. And there are at least 8 or 9 videos right now already. So you can check those out, and please, share these awareness videos. These are people's stories. Storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to educate people and help reduce delays in diagnosis, and also to reduce stigma. So we're really proud of these videos. And so if you've enjoyed this, please check out our other videos. I did mute you, Dr. Mignot, for a second. Let me unmute you. Okay, there you are. Oh, I like this. This is nice. This window of yours.
Oh, yes. I don't know. I can't see myself, but oh,
That's
yes.
cool.
There.
So I just did my quick advertisement for Project Sleep's programming, and that's all I wanted to add at the end. We did have a great question from the audience to ask if someone has type 2 narcolepsy, could it develop into type 1?
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, but the best way is to know if they are HLA positive. If you are HLA negative, then the probability is 0, pretty much. But if you're HLA positive, it's possible. It usually decreases with, we have been looking at this, and it looks like 50% of people, it's a little more complicated, but some people can develop narcolepsy type 1 over time if they are HLA positive, but it's probably a small portion. And it really depends how long ago the symptoms started. If the symptoms started like 1 year ago and starting with sleepiness, then abruptly, so I mean, it's not uncommon that cataplexy will develop later and other symptoms will develop. But if, for example, it's already 5 or 10 years of having just a little bit of sleepiness, probably that's less likely.
Okay, great.
Because most of the symptoms they develop within 3 years.
Okay, that's very helpful. We have gone way over the amount of time that we planned to take of Dr. Mignot's time today. So I think we've, other people asked questions. I think we ended up kind of answering them, I hope. And we're just so thankful to you, Dr. Mignot, for taking this time to—
No problem. I hope it was helpful.
Oh, it's just it's like so unbelievably helpful, I think, hearing your perspective. And thank you. I know I asked you some tough questions, and maybe we don't know the answers to all the questions about COVID-19, but I thank you for taking the time to even tell us what we don't know, because I think, these questions otherwise just kind of circulate in our heads, and it's just really helpful to know that, you're at the forefront of this, and that we will make progress, I believe.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. So good luck, and for everyone, stay safe, stay away a little longer. I think it's fairly clear that it's probably going to get better. And I think it's really important to stay safe until it gets better. And then after, I think the second big part will be what happened next winter, and we just have to hope we'll have a vaccine, but we just don't know. But at least I think we are on the way to getting much better now, I think, everywhere. But it could still take a month or two before it disappears in many places. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have to say, I know it's a challenging time for so many reasons, but just staying home actually isn't that hard for me. I mean, I already work from home, but I just think it's kind of has made me more okay with when I take naps and when I sleep. And I don't know, maybe it's I don't always have a lot of spoons, as we talk about with narcolepsy. And so not having a lot of spoons, it's been really nice that people are actually hosting free dance parties via, Zoom for free. And I don't have to go to a club or anything. I can just dance right here. So
that's very good. I mean, I think what's very hard is the economic impact is going to be, a lot of people are going to lose their job, and there's not much, we can do. So we just have to hope that that will come back quickly. But otherwise, yeah, working at home for me has not been very hard. But I suspect I'm one of the privileged, of course.
Yeah. Me too. So, all right. Well, everyone, stay safe and healthy and sane. And thank you again, Dr. Mignot. And thank you to everyone that tuned in around the world. We will hopefully everyone on Sunday come join us for our Facebook Live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. All right.
Thank you so much, Julie. It was wonderful, as usual.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.